Hello, I was asked to teach a watercolor class using this picture, and so I decided to make a video so that those who cannot attend the class can still participate. So it's not a comprehensive watercolor class, but I will teach you how to do a picture that looks like this. We're going to turn it into something that looks like this, or very similar. We'll see how it turns out today. So the first thing I'm going to go over are materials that we need to have. Okay, watercolor paper, number one. If you're doing this at home, not very expensive. You need to have tape. You can use washi tape, or you can use this. It's watercolor artist tape. You can get it at craft stores. Okay, then you also need 2 paintbrushes, medium and a small. If you're doing a background, you need a larger brush, but we're not doing a background. So this is the kind of brush used for a larger background. Our background today is white. So you also need 2 jars or containers of water, one that is clean and one that is dirty. I've already used mine, so normally you start off with 2 clean and one of them becomes dirty. You also need paint. So there's several different kinds. This one is dry and a lot more difficult to use, even though it comes in lots of colors. It takes longer to work with. Most people have colors like this. This is wet watercolor paint, and it's very easy to use. I'm going to be using this one today. It's a little old, but it has a palette on the side of it. So that's very important when you buy it in the package like this, to keep it in the palette, because we're going to use that for our colors. Let me see if I can keep that in view right now. Okay, so that's important. So we have all of our materials. We're going to go ahead and start with our picture. So you have to start with whatever you want to paint. This is our picture that we are using as a template. It's best to sketch it out, even if you already have what you want, to make sure it's exactly what you want. So I tried to sketch this as close as possible to this one. As you can see, it's a little bit different. As you go around the circle, I was adding the flowers and leaves, and there wasn't room for all of them. And so making sure you have the correct space for all of your items, and everything on this page will end up on this page. When you do watercolor, you cannot sketch on your watercolor paper because it will stay on there even after you add the color, so you have to just use the paint, and that's all. So we always have a sketch to go off of. You notice my sketch paper and my watercolor paper are the same size. That's so that I can use it as a good template. I'll move that over here. Something else that you need, and materials needed, paper towels. So when you change colors, you have a place to blot your water off of. Okay, so once you have sketched your picture that you want to paint, it's always best to practice a little bit with the different colors to figure out which color you want. We never want to just take a color and put it right on here, because you can't take it off. You want to make sure it's the right thing. Also, it's best if you've never done watercolor before to practice some of the shapes, the leaves and the flowers. Fabric is really easy. You just kind of pull the color down. Leaves, what you want to do with your brush, and I'll show you on the sketch paper. Okay, so first we start with our clean water. You dip your brush in clean water and then pick a color. So we're going to do some green. You can see over here. Since it's just plain green, I'm not mixing it. I'm just going to get it wet with clean water and then scrape off any excess. If you want a lighter color, you add more water, and you can still use just a little bit of the paint, you can either turn it over and use the back for practice, or you can use the front. I'm going to use the back to show you how to do leaves. So first you take your brush. Now that it is wet, it comes to a point at the end. And so that will help us when we're making leaves. So you start by pushing down on the point first, and then dragging it around, and then going to the other side and also dragging it around. As you press down the paintbrush, you'll see the water coming and paint coming out of the paintbrush. It's okay to let it pool at the end if you want a more even color. Then if you, here I'll show you, you drag it and you can even it out by dragging it back and forth. With leaves, they're harder. See, that one's a little more even. You just make them how you like. If it's a smaller thing, this is sketch paper, so it's not going to dry the same way the regular paper is, where if it has too much water, it kind of buckles like that. You'll see on the watercolor paper, it won't do that as much now that we've taped it down. Okay, so those are a couple of leaves. Clean my brush off. If you want to do flowers, we have quite a few flowers. I'm actually doing roses on this. I tried out some flowers earlier. Something more like this shape. And they turned out okay. So if you want to do flowers like this, it's very similar to leaves. You get your clean water, add it to your paint. It is good to put some here in case you can't see your color. That's pretty dark. So what you can do is add some more water to that, make it a little bit lighter. Okay, so here we go. So it's best to make more of a flat shape. I mean, you can turn it on its side, but if you turn it to the flat side, you can make more of a rounded shape for flower petals. Actually, the bigger the flower petal, the easier it is to make. And if you kind of pull them to a point like this towards each other, then you can make it into a flower. You just round the edges, pull it to a point. You can mix colors, more than one color in if you want. Once you have the watercolor on the page, if you take another color and add it to it, say you want to do a little bit of yellow in the center, you can add it while it's still wet and it just bleeds a little bit. It has a kind of a cool effect. Looks like a violet. So that's neat. Or you can just let it dry, and then if you add the water, if you add the yellow after it's dried, then it looks more like this. See, these dried purple, we add the yellow after, so it looks just like a flower. Okay, so I'm actually doing roses because I thought that looked cool. Let's see, let's get some red. These colors are actually kind of old. Let's see if I can clean up this red a little bit. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Get some red up here. Okay, so the roses you do a little bit different. Kind of like a rosebud at the end. And then the petals kind of go, it's not going to have as much detail because it's more of a rosebud. Like that. Kind of like that. So that's what I'm going for in this picture. It's still wet. Okay. So, there are 3 layers when you're doing watercolor. The first layer is the background, which we are not doing. Our background is going to be white. The second layer is the foreground, which is your fabric, your flower petals, your leaves, anything that has color needs to have a little bit of foreground first, and then we add the details after. So we always start lighter in color if we can. Some things like the beard, and this one obviously is part of the darkest part of the picture. And if you have like a red, you can go ahead and add that, and then go back later and add little details of extra red. Any of these dots, that's a detail you add later. The leaf stems, you can add those after. All the little things, and even the folds and the fabric, you can add that after. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I have found that it's easiest when I'm doing this picture to start with the head and then work around it. Otherwise, the circle that you make might be too small. So I'm going to start with the hair. I don't know if you can see that yet, which is brown, which is actually the darkest color that we are going to do in this picture. And I'm going to pull some brown. So what I do is I get some clean water. You can see that. And then I mix it in with the brown. And then over here I just dab the water. And that way I can mix, without mixing more color, I can add more clean water and make it a lighter color. So the lighter color is going to be just adding more water to the paint. Less paint, more water. Okay, let's see. And I'm going to test that over here because I don't want it to be too dark. Yeah, that's okay. Okay. So we're going to start at the top of the head. Now, if I look at my picture, I can see kind of how far apart. I want about that far from the top. So here's where I'm going to start up here. And what we're doing is we're just adding the color in an even layer and making the shape that we want. And this one is going to be hair. If you can either dab the paintbrush like I'm doing to make a continuous shape, or you pull with the paintbrush just to kind of level out the paint, the water. The water is where the color is. So we're leveling it out. So it's all even. There we go. That's the hair. The beard should be about the same color. So we're just going to use the same bit. We're going to come down here. If you use the leading edge of your paintbrush, you can make a nice edge. All right, we have a lovely beard and hair. And I just realized that even though I measured with my hands, I still didn't get it quite right. It's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. What you're going for is the same size head, which is good. And I should still be able to put the flowers around it. So, good, good. Okay, that's done. It's very important when you're using watercolor not to do two colors that are right next to each other in a row. So I can't do the headscarf just yet because this is still drying, and so the colors will bleed when they're both wet. Now you can tell if it's dry yet by putting the back of your hand on it, and if it feels cold, it feels a little cold to the touch, it's not completely dry. So we want to wait until it's completely dry before we do the color next to it. So what I'm going to do next is actually, I want to do this down here. So in some of these other ones, I did like a blue shirt or covering. This one is also blue, but a lot lighter. But but it's hard to tell if there is a shirt and some other blue covering on this or not. So I'm just going to do a very light blue in the undershirt and leave all of this like a sash of the same light color. So let's see. This is a little bit tricky. I need to figure out how far down to go with this other color. That is going to be the shirt. So rinse off your paintbrush, dab it on your paper towel, and we are going to do some clean water in our blue for the shirt. I want it to be quite light, so I'm taking just a little bit of color from the blue and adding a lot of clean water to it. It's a bigger space, and so it's best to mix a lot of color first so that it all goes on the same, and also so it's not super dark and I can, let's see. All right, so as that is there, we want the sash going around about that much, and so we're gonna go under there and we're just pulling it across. It's very light color. It might be easier to do this after doing the sash because you're really just filling in the extra space. But because I don't want to have to wait until the other one dries, and I'm not ready yet to do the flowers. You can do the flowers next while it's drying. That's fine. But I just want to finish this. And remember, we can add more details. We can add more color when we do the details. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just getting a general area for the blue to be. Just filling in arms and the shirt. It's almost like doing a shadow of a person instead of like the whole person. We're just pulling the color down. Okay, good. Okay, that should be dry enough. Rinse it off. We want to get this headscarf, at least the top part, done. I realize I just did that on the bottom too. So, I think a light, so I did a couple of different colors. I did this one in a gray. This one's like a light brown. I actually think I like the light brown the best. So we make light brown with new water. I'm actually going to steal some of this brown that I used already and put it in a different spot and then add more water to it. You can add a little yellow if you'd rather have a little more beige. Just real light. We don't want it to be the same color as the beard and hair for sure. So what we're going to do is we're going to start kind of on the edge here and just drag it across till it meets at the top. Try not to touch what you've already done, but if it's dry, it shouldn't affect it. You should be fine. Okay, so yeah, just use your brush to drag the water across until you get the look you're going for. You can see that the paper gets wet and it will try to buckle. That's why we have it taped down so it can't do that. And as it dries, it'll dry flat. So don't worry about that. I'm just going to do across the front. It's actually not that much of a headscarf on the front. It is using quite a lot of water because this is a big area. So probably should have added more water. If you want it to be flowing nice and round like that, make sure you use your brush to flow around the edges and then down. Now we're making this all one color because we will add the folds in here as details later. And I'm just gonna continue doing this until I get kind of like what I want it to look like. Yep, should have made some more. If you have to remix color, that's fine. You're just in danger of it not being exactly the same, which is also fine. Okay, so we have actually more folds here. This goes down, but this comes across. Okay, so try to just add more black in it. Whoops. It's okay. It's fabric. It's going to look a little funny. Just try your best to use a flat part of the brush to even out the color. So that's all the same. Anything you don't like, you can always try to fix later with details. It's pretty simple. Just doing this. Oh, there's a little black over there. It's always good to make sure your palette is clean before you start using it. And you have the bottom. I've just decided to fade out rather than doing all the way to the bottom. If you want, you can go all the way bottom. I did that. And this one, the color comes all the way to the edge where I have it taped. And that's fine. It looks okay with that. But this one is a bit lighter in color. So I'm just having it fade out, which is pretty easy to do with watercolor because as you pull the water down, it does get thinner. And so it does have a really nice fade effect as it comes to the bottom. Okay, we gotta move on quickly. Okay. There we go. Okay, so that's our picture of Jesus. I will go back after and add some skin color. It looks very pale right now. So, but now that we have his whole figure in there, we can go ahead and do the flower. So I'm going to switch now and use my smaller brush. Make sure it's clean. Because I want to do a very thin line all the way around to help me place my flowers. So I'm actually going to do a brown line. So I'm going to get some more of this brown and I'm going to add more water to it. I don't know if you can see that. Just so, and the important thing in this, because you want a thin line, the less water and paint you have on your brush, the thinner the line will be. As you push the brush onto the paper, it lets the water out, and so the less you have on your brush, the thinner your line is. And so I'm just going to start here, where it is over here, and try to do a circle. Circles are actually pretty hard. But in this case, it doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to cover it quite a bit with flowers and other things. It kind of looks like a halo, but once you add the flowers to it, it won't really look as much like that. So just make a very thin, delicate line, and that's so we know where to put all of our flowers. You can always go back later. This one, I added like a braided wreath type effect. I thought that looked neat. So you can add that if you want after we finish the flowers. It's pretty easy. But this one's just going to be a straight, very thin, solid line. And that helps us figure out where to put the flowers. So once we're done with that, then we're going to move on to the flowers. Yes, flowers and then leaves. So we do the flowers first because there's less of them and it's easier to place them where we want them and then fill in the leaves after. And I'm using red. So we clean our brush, go back to the large brush. I think that's easier for flowers. Get clean water. I'm using red because I'm doing roses. If you want to use purple and do regular flowers, 5 petals is usually the most common. Or you can do tulips. Those are really nice. And red, orange, or purple. I'm doing some roses. So I am going to test my color first to make sure it's, yeah, that's pretty good. It's like pinkish red, so that's fine. Some of them are facing up and some are facing down. So just, I'm making like a circle for the top. And then the rest is just, you know, flower petals that go around until they make a rose shape. More of a rose bud, I guess, than that. Like that. So you can just, if you look at it's important to look at your paper and kind of follow. You don't have to stick to it, but it helps make sure everything fits if you put it kind of in the same place as your template. You can just go crazy with it. Okay, I'm going to add the flowers and then go into leaves after that. Okay, so now I have a bunch of little flowers all the way around. As you can see, when they dry, because of the way the water is, it soaks into the sides more and makes a really pretty little outline around the flower. So now we're going to do some leaves, or actually a lot of them. Clean off your brush in the dirty water, dab it on your paper towel, and then get some fresh water for some green. Let's see, space. Ooh, that's a bright green. You probably didn't even see that because it's off the screen. Yeah. Okay, so leaves are probably my favorite thing to do because they're fairly simple. You just you have to make sure that it's dry and you're not putting your hand in wet paint. You just use your edge. It's got too much paint on. You don't want to have too much paint on, too much water. So you use your leading edge on one side and then the other edge, and that turns into a really pretty leaf. And you can do different sizes. You can do small leaves, cluster of small leaves if you want. Just left and right. It's very important not to do the stems at this stage. We want to make sure that everything is dry before we add our stems. So it might look funny at first, but you're just adding leaves. The direction is important because obviously you want the stems from the leaves to not run into the flowers. So just make sure you pay attention to which direction the leaves are. Try not to put them too close to the flowers. That'll look a little more crowded. You don't really want that. But yeah, so do leaves all the way around. Okay, I think that is enough leaves maybe. I wanted to point out that I did rose petal leaves or something similar to that, but there are lots of different kinds of leaves. I'll show you an example. One of the ones I was working on looks totally different. It's a different shape, and it has lots of different foliage on it. So if you want, you don't have to do all the same. You can do